Hi, I'm so excited to be here today at Nocode Conf, and I want to talk today about how we can all make websites so much better with no code. Now, today might be a little different than what you're used to because this isn't about tooling or tech at all. It's not about divs or about classes. It's about this. In my experience, the one reason that Webflow projects fail, or at least that they don't stall, or at least that they stall out, isn't because of yes code or no code. It's because of no content. So my name's Kendra Rainey, and I lead brand strategy and content design at Edgar Allen. And I have been building the internet for close to 20 years now using no code in a way because, well, I'm a digital writer by trade. So Edgar Allen's a story-first company, and we started working in Webflow about 8 years ago because we wanted to empower authors to have better stories with their audiences. So our mission is to shorten the distance between idea and execution so we can get our clients' brands in front of customers faster and so we can learn and listen and make websites better. So today I want to expand the conversation around no code to include how we think about building a stronger brand with great content and Webflow. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to cover 3 big ideas that'll help you create better web experiences. And I'm going to offer some practical examples that you can use in your workflow, regardless of whether you're on a big team or you're a studio of one. And here's what we're going to talk about today. First, digital experience is a narrative. I want to make the point that we're not just building boxes or shelves to hold things. When we build in Webflow or in any other tool, we're building stories on the web. And I'm going to talk about what that means. Secondly, content is design on the web. There's no separating the two. We'll discuss how this mindset shift can help you create better experiences. And finally, we're going to talk about how brand is a club. It's a living thing, not a concrete foundation. It's about emotion and connection. And that boils up to one thing, that none of us are just building marketing sites. We're building tools of connection that empower brands. Or if we're doing it well, that's what we're doing. So this presentation is all about how we can use no code as an emphasis on content to do better in our work. In fact, today's presentation was actually built in Webflow using the methodologies described here today. And at the end, we're going to jump in and look at the details. But without further ado, let's get started. So we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about the tooling and the technology of the digital experience. But at the end of the day, it's really about this. We're here to create something so that our brands and our clients' brands can have a better story with their customers so that people get what they need from those brands. And here's why. Story is the fundamental lens through which we understand the world. The first things we learn are through stories, and the ways we best connect are through narratives. Our brains are simply tuned to see things this way. And so we are tuned to search for the emotional threads and the devices and conventions of story whenever we're gathering information or learning or experiencing something. And that includes on the web. So if we view a site as a narrative, we shift our entire mindset. We stop seeing an experience as boxes down a page or as interactions or as something that's a demonstration of the power of a technology. And we start seeing it as a vehicle for communication, which requires that we look more closely at content as a tool. So if you remember anything from high school English, you'll remember that successful narratives have a few attributes. First, they're consistent. Characters or voice or setting can't abruptly change from one page to another. Secondly, they must be clear in their goals and intent. They must be clear-minded in what it is they are and what they're meant to achieve. You don't often want to say, start a horror movie and then find out midstream that it's a cooking show, unless that's part of some greater, weirder point. Thirdly, it must be accessible. So it should be appropriate and available and understandable to the people that the story is meant for. And that's a huge thing, both on the sort of softer side of messaging, where we want things to be brand and audience appropriate, but also on the realities of inclusivity and accessibility and creating narratives that include the right accommodations for specific groups. And then finally, a good story has to have a satisfying structure, an introduction, a middle where all the meat is, and a conclusion that makes sense. And on the web, that's often a thing to do, a place to go, questions answered, or goals achieved. So now to create a successful experience that does all these things, you may want someone on your team focused specifically on that aspect, right? So a content person. And common sense says that you will also want them there from the beginning when the story is being formed. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, even though, interestingly, the idea of pairing writers with designers is really nothing new. This is from Apple's HIG, the Human Interface Guidelines from 1987, and it says wherever words are involved, a skilled writer should be on the design team. And I promise you, there are very few times when words are not involved. I mean, even in the 50s and 60s Mad Men heyday of advertising, creatives were teams. They were copywriter, designer, or copywriter art director pairs who worked really closely together to create these tight, integrated full packages of words and design. Somehow that we got here to a world where, as a longtime digital copywriter, I am still asked to just give me 50 words of text for this box. Or how about you write a headline because you know it looks good there. So if we started with writers in the room from the beginning so long ago, why is content often left to the very end of the work stream and most often written separately from design and UX or entirely left out of the equation? Well, here's a few reasons. First, silos. For a long time, there was this unspoken mandate to pretty much play only in your discipline's lane and affect just your part of the design and build experience. Especially pre-no-code, designers didn't design experiences, they designed flat things. Writers certainly didn't advise on site structure. They worked in Word docs and filled boxes. And clients gave feedback on the websites they were paying for through kind of a drive-through window of sorts, third party at very low fidelity. Another thing, if content creation is often left behind in the planning and execution process, research isn't even in the race. So we research to create new products. We research to build new brands. But when it comes to building a website for a thing or a business, suddenly nobody's got the budget to ask questions in a serious way. So we're kind of left to guess. And we end up just giving a glance to thinking about what the audiences for our sites really want and need out of the experience. App and product developers do a much better job at this. But in the web world, more often than not, as typical design teams, we're given a one-sheeter persona and just kind of told to do our best. Next reason we're here, I think, is because of gated technology. So web development has been the deepest, blackest box in our industry. Code was the domain of a few specially trained souls. And that meant that sending a site off to be developed was kind of like wrapping your baby up in a blanket and handing it over and hoping it didn't come back to you in Easter ham wrapped in shag carpeting. The point is, with only a few people having the means of production, I think we know that the best work doesn't always get done. Finally, and this is one that never really made sense to me, lack of cross-discipline collaboration. So maybe because the making belonged to just a few, crossing the streams between creatives, between design and writing, between UX and content, and really between technical and non-technical people, it just didn't happen all that much. But I bet you could look around the web and say, oh boy, it probably should have. Let's just say this, the best way to create an amazing digital experience is not to ask the team of smart folks working on it to treat it like a relay race where UX works solo and then hands off to design and then hands off, if we're lucky, to a content specialist at the end to fill in the lorem ipsum. But you know what? No code changed everything. No code like tools like Webflow and others, they changed the game. They democratized the process of creating great web experiences and let us all a level of collaboration unlike anything we'd ever had before. It gave designers more power to follow a project through to completion and shape it right up to launch. And with a little bit of a fight, we're also now seeing that it gives developers a lot of possibilities and freedoms too. But no-code tools and sort of a no-code mindset makes collaboration with various groups of less technical people possible, like writers, for instance. So how do we get started integrating content more fully into the design process? Here's some tips. One, we want to invite everyone to the table early, especially writers. Before design starts, before UX starts wireframing, imagine trying to make a movie without a script. This happens a lot on web projects, and we found that they tend to stall if content isn't accounted for or given enough time and space to be done well and done collaboratively. So secondly, plan for collaboration. It's a great way to kick things off. It would be a formal content discovery. So we treat this like a workshop where UX and writers and design and brand are present, as well as subject matter experts and client stakeholders. And there we do a bunch of things where we talk about audience needs and goals and jobs to be done, language and voice, and site structure, and big questions the experience needs to answer. Everybody contributes, everybody asks questions, and we come out the other end knowing what each other and our client SMEs know. And third, That shouldn't end there, though. You should also fight for the time and budget for research, if at all possible. And that doesn't have to be an expensive 100-person in-depth ethnographic study. It can be desk research, it can be surveys, it can be interviews. As long as we're taking some time to find out what the site audience really thinks and needs and must achieve with regard to the experience. And finally, if you're not able to invite a writer to the table before you start design, or let's say you're a team of one and you are all the things, I just recommend you open up a blank document and start to get the basic structure of each page down. Simply thinking through the whole site in sort of an outline form, like you might do with a term paper or maybe that novel that you're working on. It'll help with everything down the line, from wireframes to design directions. Next, here's a truth I want to just say out loud for everybody here. Content is design. It is design on the web, on good websites anyway. And seeing it any other way dismisses how humans consume information and kind of ignores the power of verbal storytelling. So to any writers here, hello. In case you haven't heard it before, you are not simply fillers of character counts or boxes. You are designers that just happen to use words. And most importantly, you are a collaborator with a keen sense of narrative and the keys to unlocking the very best of total user experiences of whatever you're working on. You're a puzzle piece that fits nicely in among the skill sets of UX folks and designers and strategists. And thanks to smarter people than me, we got a name for what's been missing for so long in the digital design world, a job title that I am proud to adopt from time to time, and our writers at Edgar Allan adopted last year, and that is the title of content designer. And content design is likely a term you may have heard. You might not know a lot about it. So what is it? So it defines content as an important design element as any other on the page. And that means that content is as important as photography and color choice and UX. It's as important as anything you might lump into the bucket of design, because we don't often put content there, do we? Even though a great deal of digital things are at least 50% words, if not more. What's more important, though, is by saying content and design out loud, in the same breath, it gives importance to the idea that the things that come along with it are important. The words on the screen, plus that communication and story that come alongside. There's a little bit of history on content design. It was developed by Sarah Winters. There's a great book called Content Design out there. It was developed primarily to help at sort of page level information organization and accessibility on very large sites like uk.gov or on other governmental sites. But it's kind of hopped the pond to the United States recently and has become something that is happening in product shops all over the US. I also think, though, as a marketing writer and as a person who creates brand websites and websites that sell things, it's a great way to ensure that we're writing the right things for the right people in the right ways, including brand and marketing and sales, which is most of what we do. So content design is a discipline, it's a job title, but it's also a movement with 4 tenets. And they are, you want to first question everything. So don't assume that because there's a headline at the top of that page, that headline is the right way to convey the information. Don't assume that because every site has a content form or a contact form at the bottom, that the site needs a contact form at the bottom. Don't just put an eyebrow headline there because the designer likes it that way. Don't just assume. Research. So research, structured research into audience needs, word usage, communication style, accessibility needs. These things are the backbone of content design. And one of the things that was game-changing for me as a longtime strategist and copywriter, I know that in brand, we researched audience, we researched trend, we researched competition. But when it came time to write a site, we often didn't look back to the strategy very often, or around at the world the site was going to live in, or truly deeply at the real needs or wants of the people who were going to use it. We just made our best guess, and we filled the boxes, more or less. Content design does not guess. To the next point, it makes informed decisions about how content appears, how it's presented, how it flows, one page and one piece to the next. Content designers will choose to use a bulleted list or a 3D map or an extra long headline because we've discovered through our research that it's a good decision to make to achieve a specific outcome. And on the web, all those outcomes belong to one group, your site's audience. Finally, and this is probably the most important part, content design puts audience first always, always, always. It looks to its audience for answers to the why and the how of the look and the format and the content of a site. And on the flip side, it also has an answer for why did we do that? That always involves what we know about the people that experience was meant for, and what needs to be achieved by it. So whether that's, for them to get a certain amount of information or to buy now or to get in touch or to learn to remember that we're brilliant. Personally, I always thought guessing, is this the right thing to put here on this page, was scary, if not a little bit reckless. So how do you do this on your team or your team of one? Well, we've got 4 things that I'm going to go through kind of slide by slide. Everybody in the pool, that's about encouraging live collaboration. Outlines and intent, rather than start with a flat sitemap, why not go a little deeper? Notional copy, if there can be notional design, there can be notional copy, and it's really useful. And authoring considerations, basically, have your authors in mind when you're building. First one, everybody in the pool. So one way to ensure that content is design is to give content designers the ability to affect layout, to play with text and wires and design, and to make suggestions about flow and look of the site. That also is a river that runs both ways. That gives UX people the opportunity, or designers the opportunity, to say, I don't think that headline works. It doesn't meet the needs of the audience. It gives everybody the ability to use their talents collaboratively. So we do that in tools like Figma and in Webflow's editor to bring our writers into the design documents. I will warn that an everybody in the pool mindset is fantastic, but to keep the metaphor going, you kind of got to have swim lanes, or it gets kind of chaotic. So bringing people together and knowing the structure of how they can work together is important. We typically put writers and UX people together very early to work out the greater structure. And then later, writers and designers are going to work together as page design is being created to marry text and imagery. Another thing that's helpful is site outlines and intent. And so I have this thing against sitemap being the first thing a client sees of their new site experience. By the time site structure has been figured out, a whole lot of research has been done. A lot of big decisions have been made. And sitemaps, just in my experience, don't relay that very well. They're just hard for non-design people to understand. And they often just kind of nod and say, okay. And I think they figure they can change stuff later on, which obviously we do not want that. So instead, we do a narrative site outline, as I mentioned earlier, and then we blow that out a bit. So alongside that outline, our UX and content design folks will work together to define the intent of the major sections of the site. And so this backs up the idea that an experience is a story by talking clients through the thinking behind each section, based a lot of times on the jobs to be done that we've identified for that part of the site. So this is a long-winded way to say that rather than like plopping a flat map down, we're going to use a more of a Google Maps approach and walk people through what could happen on the homepage more in 3D. We'll talk about the emotion of it, the rise and fall of story down the page, where clicks lead our audiences from there. And we do this in an unpresentation format a lot of times, just sort of in the Figma file, which feels casual and invites collaboration from the client as well, and live feedback, which is at this early point exactly what you want. You want to test theories and see what resonates and what doesn't before you get too far down the line. Another thing that's a great tool for using content design and content people better is what I call notional copy. So we all know what notional design is: style boards, things that capture kind of the vibe and energy of a design before we make it real. So why do we use nonsense, lorem ipsum, as a placeholder and layout when we can use something to create meaning instead? So when we're in design and final copy isn't complete, we often create directional text that shows better what could be. An example of a notional copy headline might be bold, benefit-focused headline about whatever topic, rather than just lorem ipsum sit dolor amit. This does a couple of things. First, it offers more information about how information is going to be portrayed. It's a gut check to make sure we're meeting the goals we've laid out for the site. And it highlights actually the holes of information, things that we might not have and we'll need to get before we go into development and time gets short. Secondly, it's not real copy. It doesn't derail the entire presentation. People tend to get hung up on tiny details, and we want them at this point to see the world. We want them to see the whole picture. So we can skim with notional copy and get the meaning without starting a conversation about whether we need to, use contractions or something. Finally, some no-code tools like Figma make it really easy for non-technical folks like writers to collaborate in the early stages of experience creation. And other tools like Webflow make it really easy to collaborate and affect things later in the game, even after a site goes live. But especially for large and complex sites, it really pays to think backwards from the build, to consider how things can be authored easily by non-technical people like your clients. So you're going to want to make considerations toward authoring, like can updates even be made in the editor, or are the elements just too complex for that to happen? Is it going to be okay to have someone change things in the designer, or does it need to be that simple? The point, don't build things that are too complex for the abilities of your authors down the line. And that is yet another instance of paying attention to audience needs, because this isn't just about the customers, this is about your audience and the people that you're presenting to and will have to use this site. And now, finally, since we've been talking about the process and technology, just to remind you that if we're doing this right, we're not just building websites here. We're building a set of marketing tools designed to empower brands. So it bears thinking about how brand plays into this. This is my feeling as a brand strategist about what brand is. Brand's not a foundation. It's not architecture. It's something alive and emotional, something people align with because they want to be part of it. They want to identify it. They want to live amongst it. It's more than an object or some unchanging structure. Brand is a club that you build around a product or a service. Sometimes brand is also a scary thing, but if you boil it down, it's really just made of three things. Position, which is a strategic calculation that comes from audience research and trend and competitive research and a sense of differentiation. It's vibe, and that sort of rolls up voice and tone and personality of the brand, the way the brand acts and lives in the world. And story, emotional hook, the narrative that the brand tells. We love brands because of the story they allow us to be a part of. And that's something that happens largely after that strategy deck is sat down on the conference room table. It's through all the ways the brand comes to life, including on the web. So the problem is, a lot of the time, the richness of all of this information and research is lost on the way between strategy and handoff to development. And after the fact, brand owners are also often inhibited from making updates to that living thing, to that site, based on changing forces or needs. And we don't think that's right. So how can no code and content design support brands? One thing that you can do is involve brand in experience creation. So in my career as a brand strategist, my involvement in a project typically stopped before we got to web design and content creation, unless I also happen to be the writer on the project. I would advocate for everyone for more crossover, that a representative of brands stays around at least through content discovery to advise on how best to use the research and insight from the brand strategy when moving into web creation, and to make sure that the story is clear and going to travel all the way to the end. As a brand to build agency, we at Edgar Allan have a unique opportunity to link brand and site creation really strongly. And it's a big reason that we do it all from start to finish under one roof. Secondly, you can use content design to reinforce audience-centric perspective. So good brand strategy assesses the needs of the right audiences and then appeals to them. Content design works similarly and reinforces brand and audience-centric experiences just more at the ground level. Third, build a story, not a site. Remember, experiences are narratives. We tend to look at sites as pages that link together, or boxes to fill down a page. If we see it as something, like I mentioned earlier, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, we can also reflect that brand story more clearly on our sites and create experiences that are seamless and thoughtful and successful. And finally, all of this is about rethinking the way we collaborate across disciplines, but opening up who is allowed to do what when we're creating this experience, and acknowledging that there's never been a better time than now to do this because of the power that no-code tools like Webflow and others give us. And that leads to my final point. The first wave of no-code, that was for designers. The second is for authors, for storytellers, for writers, and importantly, even clients who are just now finding out that Webflow lets them use or own their own marketing layer without relying on an agency to shift their story or add or subtract or evolve their websites. And this gets to why I'm here. As a writer, and I see content all too often being left behind when we're creating experiences. But with Webflow and other no-code tools, me, the no-codiest of no-code people, I get a seat at the table. There I can improve story and accessibility and clarity and audience focus. And I can deeply affect how the digital experiences we create for our clients work. In fact, I'm doing it right now. This presentation was made in Webflow. And I'm going to bring you into the back end of this real quickly and show you the way that this was built just a little bit. You can see, and I'll open up everything here. You can see it's just a rich text editor. My speaker notes are stuck to the bottom. My team has done an amazing job also creating this in the image of a slideshow presentation like Keynote and PowerPoint, I also have speaker notes, which, and this is the cool part, there's also that kind of slide out there. When I change my speaker notes, the page changes as well. So that is to say, let me go back full screen. If I can. All right. That is to say, we're not trying to replace Keynote or PowerPoint. This serves a greater purpose, and it's just an example of how anyone can make something and add their voice and their talent on the web with powerful tools like this. And that thing that I just kind of gave you a peek at, it's going to be available as a clonable after the conference as well. So there's so much more to talk about. We'd love to continue the conversation here. We can find me on Twitter at letter11. You can find Edgar Allen on Twitter at Edgar Allen Co. I talk a lot about content design and content creation and brand. And the Edgar Allen Co. Twitter handle talks a little bit more about the technical aspect of Webflow and no-code philosophy. So thanks for listening to this message from your friendly neighborhood digital writer. Experiences are narratives. Content is design, and brand is a club you build. So on your next project, when are you going to invite content experts to the table? And what amazingness will you create when everybody gets in the pool with the help of no-code tools and a content design mindset? Thank you very much for having me.